Hi, I'm Mike Holliday, Managing Director of Residential Estates. Alongside me I have Andrew Brassey, our Business Development Manager.
Good to be here, Mike. Good to be here.
So today we're going to be talking about short-term let property and what are the key benefits of investing in that particular sector. So I guess, Andrew, we start with explaining to people exactly what is a short-term let property. And it's, in its simplest terms, it's renting a property out on a nightly basis to guests.
As opposed to, say, an AST, which is for a minimum of 6 months, maybe 12 months ideally.
Yeah.
So short term, as in, that's what it says, isn't it? Short term, nightly.
Typically there are two. There are holiday lets, which tend to be your properties in your coastal areas, that kind of thing, Lake District, Devon, those sort of places on it, where they tend to be a little bit of self-use a lot of the time when people buy those sort of properties.
Lifestyle investments.
Exactly. And then you have sort of corporate lets, as we call them, which is more for your business travellers and people staying that way.
Which tradesmen, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Or executives coming in to work at various companies.
Exactly. And then normally those purchases are slightly less emotional because they're not necessarily buying it investors for themselves to stay in there. They're looking at it purely from a returns point of view.
Yeah. Pure numbers.
In terms of drilling exactly then what are the key benefits of it? Well, for the holiday let side is what we've touched on there, the fact you've got a bit of self-use and nice to take the family away, that type of thing. But we're going to focus on the corporate let side and what are the key benefits of that particular model. The obvious one and the number one thing really is ultimately higher returns.
So when you say high returns, you're looking at what sort of level higher? So say an AST might be £1,000 on a particular apartment. What would it be on short-term lets? Yeah,
well, I mean, in a good location, it typically should double that of an AST return. Now, the last few years, because AST rents have started to increase up, which is brilliant for the investment market, it's slightly narrowed that gap a little bit on there. But yeah, I mean, in the right location, you can certainly double your net returns after all costs when you do that way.
You own two yourself that you have on that model, Mike, that short-term let, and is that what you're finding? A doubling?
Yeah, absolutely. So take one of my properties in Chester, one bedroom apartment. Typically on an AST, I'll be looking at £750 a month on a 12-month AST type thing. Whereas a short-term let, it's £1,400-1,500.
Quite a significant difference, isn't it? Quite an uplift.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just looking at that, is it any more hassle for you? Because a lot of investors are looking to make things easier. It's maybe a secondary income. It's not their primary income. Is it more hassle?
No, I think partly because having a good management company behind it, and that's one of the key tips, if you like, for investors on there. Make sure you've got a good management company.
Yeah.
If you're wanting those higher returns on it, ultimately you're going to have to get higher nightly rates, and that isn't just by letting your property out on your Airbnb, your Booking.com, which anyone can do, so to speak. What you really need is those corporate bookings. And
interrupting you there, Mike, those corporate bookings, where do you get those from? So if I had a short-term let and I was thinking, I've used Airbnb, I've used maybe Booking.com or Late Rooms, how do I get into that corporate let side of it?
Well, I mean, give you an example, of Guess, our sister company, which is, manages short-term let properties and has done for a while. We have links in with relocation companies. And when we talk about relocation companies, they are companies that have contractors, if you like, on their books who come to them and say, look, I need accommodation in Chester, for instance, for 3 months for 4 workers. What accommodation have you got? Those relocation companies will only come to management companies. They won't go to your Joe Bloggs who has a property on Airbnb. They need to go through, specialist management companies that way. But they're brilliant bookings because they're long term. There's less cleans involved. You've got less void periods of it. And they can be in the sort of niche areas, and that's one of the big benefits, if you like, of short-term let properties. It isn't necessarily in the big cities that some people often think. We've had property sampling developments in places like Halifax, in Wakefield, which, when we've said to people, short-term let property there, they can't get their head around it. They think, well, I'm not going to go and stay for a weekend in Halifax, and that's not the market. We're talking about corporate guests who don't want that 12-month tenancy. They want the flexibility, partly because they may, for instance, put different workers in.
I remember you talking about that. So someone would take, say, maybe a 3-month let or short-term let, but it may be 4 or 5 different people throughout that period.
Absolutely, because you wouldn't be able to do that if you took it out a 12-month tenancy.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to look that way. So why does it work for the people booking it as well? And it is because of that. They don't have to book it for that long and stuff. And can put different
I
works.
suppose also on that side of it, talking about from the contractor's point of view, if you're there, say 3 months, you don't have to sign up to a utilities company, you don't have to sign up to broadband. So all those normal things that you would have to sign up to council tax for an AST are not there, and that's the benefit to them. Can you imagine a company having 10 different employees and having 10 different sets of utility companies to deal with, and the faff that they create?
That's it. And for the people using them, they're self-contained apartments. They're not having to stay in hotels where they don't have their kitchen facilities. These apartments on short-term lets have got all that in, and it is that home away from home.
I wonder, Mike, is it, just as totally as an aside, is it changing our view on that? Because you go back 20 years ago and you would go to the hotel, you would check yourself in, and I did it when I came out of university. I worked for BICC, and I was travelling around the country jointing optic fibre, and it would be a hotel. I'd go down to the bar at night and have a beer. I maybe didn't eat the best of food at that time. Was if you have your own kitchen within your apartment, you can cook what you wish to eat. You don't have to go and have a beer down in the bar to socialise. You can sit there, work away, watch TV.
That's it, and it's less cost. And unfortunately, because sometimes people will say, well, I might be able to get it slightly cheaper just booking a hotel room for 3 or 4 months. But what you'll find is there's not many hotels that have that availability at the time, because they are just taking in bookings as and when they come in. They haven't got a management company behind it, the likes of ourselves and other short-term let management companies that are actually saying, well, no, we're going to keep this free this 3 months because we're looking for those longer-term bookings that come in, and we don't want a 2-night one to spoil it in between all that. We're slightly going off tangent, I guess, but it's just highlighting the importance of having a really good management company behind a short-term let, and if you do that, that's where these companies will pay the higher nightly rates, and that's where ultimately you'll get the benefit from higher returns on it that way.
Sounds good.
Well, one of the other big benefits, and again I think this sometimes gets lost, is how well maintained your properties are done on a short-term let property. The old thing that I think why people sometimes were put off by the likes of Airbnb was the thought of stag do's, hen parties, that type of thing, and my apartment's going to get trashed.
Yes.
And it couldn't be any more opposite. Actually, you constantly maintain it. You've got cleaners that are going in there after every changeover. But equally, if we're getting those longer term corporate bookings that we've touched on, your 3-month ones, let's say, cleaners are still going in. They're still going in. It might be fortnightly, it might be monthly, depending on what the guest wants and what you want as the landlord. So we're regularly getting eyes in there. You're regularly getting it checked on how it's looking and maintained.
But I guess going back to that Airbnb and that stag hen party, it was the major cities, wasn't it? It was the Liverpools, the Manchesters, maybe the Leeds. It's not the Wakefields, the Halifax. It doesn't attract necessarily that type of clientele.
No, absolutely. And I suppose the question then is, so what, being more maintained, what does that bring as a benefit for an investor? Well, your future value of your property, because it's in much better condition, is massively going to help when you come to, or should you decide to exit that property on it. But also less maintenance costs. What you find is if you put a tenant in there on a long-term basis, typically it doesn't get checked until after 12 months.
It could be 6 months or it could be 12 months. They get checked in, they get checked out, and in between, we've had it, haven't we? I've had that experience where a young child's maybe scribbled on the wall in the first week, and that's not picked up for 12 months.
Yeah, well, that's it. Or screw loose somewhere that if it was a short-term let, the cleaners going in or the housekeeping team would spot it and fix it straight away. But when it's a longer-term tenant and that doesn't get spotted, the problem gets bigger and bigger, and that screw that was loose, and suddenly the whole cupboards are coming down in the kitchen. Yeah. So it can happen. So it's so important that, and it's a massive benefit of having your property let out on that basis.
And that's something that's organised by ourselves, isn't it? The cleaning side of it. It's not the investor doesn't have to look after that side of it. It's part of the package that we offer.
100%, and that's the big thing. And again, because sometimes the theory behind short-term lets is, well, it sounds an awful lot of work. Have I got the time to do it? And yes, if you were doing it yourself, it is a lot of work to it. But that's another reason of use a good management company behind it, and they can take care of that. Maybe later on in life, come retirement, so you might want to become more hands-on then and get involved in it and do it that way. But for me.
It's quite onerous, isn't it? If you think you've got someone going in every 3 nights, every 4 nights, and you've got to go and clean it, you've got to change the linen, it's quite restrictive.
Yeah, 100%.
So I can see the benefit of employing a company that does all that for you.
Yeah.
And also, being on the selfish side of it, it takes the onus off you as the owner.
Yeah.
It's not your responsibility. You've passed that responsibility to the management company. And I think we've touched on it previously about legislation. Using a management company, they know the legislation that you have to comply with to ensure that you're compliant. It's
a good point, and obviously legislation is changing by the day at the moment, and on a longer term tenant point of view, we know there's changes coming in this year where it is going to become even more restrictions in there for landlords in terms of tenant evictions and things like that. Another benefit of short term let property there is that you don't have that problem.
The amount of restriction.
Yeah, you don't have the amount of restrictions, so guests will pay up front. So first of all, you've got the money up front that way. You're not having to deal with rent arrears or anything like that. But also they'll be putting a deposit down, so any damage that they cause will come out of that deposit. Like when you book a hotel room, and that you're not going to cause any damage purely because of that. So it's a big benefit that, and it's becoming more and more beneficial that because of what's going on in the AST market and the restrictions.
The next question, Mike, would be where? Where is a good location?
Yeah.
We get that asked myself, and I'm sure yourself get asked that a lot. Where is a good location?
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be that major city, does it?
It really doesn't. And I actually think a lot of the time it's these secondary cities, secondary towns, or feeder cities and towns, as I call them, that are the ones to look out for. And a good example is Manchester and Preston, because we've sold property there, we manage property there on it. What we've seen on the property management side is actually the nightly rates aren't too dissimilar.
Yeah.
You might get £90 a night for a 1 bed in Preston. You might get 90, 100, in Manchester, that sort of amount. But you're going to pay double the price for the apartment in Manchester for it. So your yields and returns are much higher.
I guess also the supply in Preston is less than the supply in Manchester.
Yeah.
And therefore the demand, if the demand is equal, you have a far greater opportunity to tenant in Preston than you might in Manchester.
That's it, less competition. It's not rocket science to work it out. You've seen Manchester, you've seen the amount of hotels and things like that there is. You have got a bigger competition, if you like, with it. And I actually think as well, reversing it to looking from a worker's point of view of, they might be working in the centre of Manchester, let's say. Doesn't mean they necessarily want to be living in there. Quite often we find that workers actually say, can I have something just a little bit further out? Yeah, if I'm going to be there for a few months, I want that little bit of space out of the city, and I'm happy to commute and stuff. So
where would, at the moment, say the portfolio that we currently have, the developments we currently have, where would you say is a good location to buy?
Well, one that we've picked out, and we picked it out earlier last year, was Doncaster, and we should probably add on that. When we go to choose these locations, a lot of the times we'll start with the relocation companies that we mentioned earlier. So we'll go to them and say, where's the demand? Where are you getting people coming to you saying, I need accommodation in these areas? And we'll get a bit of a list at that point of, they'll say, look, we're short in these areas. And Doncaster was one of those on there with it, and it's music to our ears really, because we know we can still get apartments there at affordable levels. It's an area where there's a lot of regeneration going in. The particular site that we sourced in the end is waterfront, which waterfront apartments always add value further down the line. It's short stroll into the city centre, so it's perfect that way with it. So that was a one for us that we were looking for last year. Thankfully we found one and teamed up with a really good developer. But yeah, they're the kind of the key areas of try and find a location, an area that's got a story behind it.
Yes.
Is the government putting money into it?
There's a driver to move it forward.
Yeah, because that's a twofold thing, because you have one, as the regeneration is happening, you're getting bookings then, because you've got contractors in an area maybe doing building work, so it's brilliant for your apartments, you get them filled up. But then obviously when the works are done, you might have new businesses in the area that are taking up those offices or whatever that's been built. So that's a big thing to look out for. Obviously we do it that's our job in the acquisitional side, but there's nothing stopping investors looking at that as well.
I think it's also important to say at that point when we're in negotiations with the developer, we're talking about what we think the development should have in the way of fixtures and fittings, location wise, etc. We also look at the lease, don't we? We ensure the lease permits short-term lets, because a lot of older apartment blocks don't permit it. It's not within the parameters of that lease.
It's a really good point, and the amount of people that we have that come to us and say, well, I've spotted one, or I've got a property here, I just want to do that kind of thing, and that's fine. But typically, like you say, all leases will not allow short-term lets, and it's the benefit of buying new apartments, new developments.
I have an apartment in Manchester that doesn't permit it. Had it permitted it, I mean, the AST is good. It's making £1,200 a month, but on short-term lets, it's right in the city centre. It's there, but the lease doesn't permit. That's it, and it never will it? Unfortunately, you won't be able to change that on it. So yeah, you're dead right. Getting in there early and making sure they write it in there and through solicitors and stuff is so important with it. So that adds massive value with it as well. And one of the other big benefits as well of short-term lets property is the taxation side of things. Now, obviously, we aren't tax experts, so it's not something for us to go into a great level of detail on. But there's huge benefits there, and we advise everyone to speak to tax advisors. Look online, look at the benefits with it. The main one is the offsetting the costs against your income tax. So come myself and the short-term let property, when I look to submit my returns in January for the previous financial year, obviously. That's very efficient. January.
Yeah.
I normally leave mine until August, September.
Yeah. So at that point, obviously, hopefully you've had a good year, you've had those higher returns. What you don't want to do is lose loads of that money to Mr. Taxman. And the benefit of short-term lets is that there's a lot of things that you can offset against that tax bill. So,
and we partner with various people, don't we, on that, to get the right advice. As you say, we're not tax advisors, so we partner with people who can do that.
100%, and it's important to do so. They're up to speed with the legislation, but your typical things you can offset. Your service charges, your management fees, cleaning fees, because there's quite a lot in there that you can factor in, and you can find actually it really does lower the income tax amount. Obviously, one of the things that's changed, that's been all over the news, is the interest rates. So currently, you've got full relief of reducing that from your income tax, which is going to change slightly down to 20%. But again, it shouldn't put off investors.
If you're making a profit, aren't you? And that's the key thing.
100%. Yeah, exactly that. People argue it's like with capital gains going up. It's still you're only paying it because you've made a profit on it, and it's very similar that way of it. And so, like I say, you're still going to have that 20% of your interest rate relief, which is still really good, but as well as all those other costs. And I think sometimes people forget that. They see the headlines and think, I'm not going to now be able to do that. You are. There's just other things that you can factor into it. We could talk all day on short-term let property.
Yes.
We've been in the industry for over
a number of years.
Yeah, a number of years.
I should say that.
Yeah, over 20 in that actual particular field. Before Airbnb, we always say was even a thing. We were managing short-term let property, so we certainly know a thing or two about it. As I was saying, I speak myself. I invest in that field, so we massively believe in it. But they're the key points. Higher returns is always a big thing. Your property's maintained much better, which helps with resale value of it. Taxation benefits, less tenant restrictions that way on it. And then in terms of tips wise, it's choosing the right management company, looking at locations, not necessarily the big cities.
Yeah, the bright lights.
Yeah, exactly. So if you factor all that in, it's such a brilliant sector to invest in. On there as well. So yeah, that's kind of a roundup. If you want to hear more information, we'd love to hear from you. We want to speak to investors, don't we, and talk through the full details with it. So please do, get in touch, book in a free consultation. There's no harm in it. You don't have to buy from us or anything like that. Just pick our brains.
It's advice, isn't it? Talk it through with us.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But as always, thanks very much for watching.
Thank you.